Into the museum? Load that up. This is the second time in 2 months you finished a game too soon. What was the first one? Welcome to the Museum of Orphaned Concepts, a guided tour of ideas that Irrational Games discarded or reworked. Okay. Oh, exhibit. Forest concept. Okay. Look at all these different kind of big daddies. They look very different. Weird. The original model for the bouncer of a Big Daddy featured a flat-headed drill at the end of his arm. Huh. Who are these guys? Irrational internal name for this prototype was Big Daddy Variant, who mauled players with enormous hooks. Maul people with enormous hooks? Spilled! Yes, you're right. That was another good one that ended quicker than I thought. It may be hard to imagine that this creature, whose job it was to reclaim Adam from the corpses around the Rapture, was the earliest iteration of the idea of a little sister. That was originally a little sister? Look at how disgusting that is compared to a little sister. That doesn't work. I have no empathy for these things. So little sisters you kind of do, you know? These are cool. Yeah, I definitely like these things. They're just kind of neat. Oh, wow, this place is huge. Okay. Who's this guy? The hell is that thing? Stitchy, the first splicer? Oh, yeah, no, you can't make splicers big. They have to be like humanoid, you know? Like they were in the game. That was... Can't imagine a splicer like that. Unless it was like a boss or something. Who's this guy? Early splicer? Another early splicer? Early splicer. I like the splicers. I like where they landed with them. These are a little too, you know, disfigured, I think is the word I would say. Who's this guy? Pre-Yam Hand? Before solidifying the fiction around Adam, Irrational experiment with the idea of it being an external injected substance. Oh, interesting. That guy's horrifying. Splicer concept. Big Daddy concept. Even that one's pretty cool. I think it's a little too underwatery and not sinister enough. Same with that one. Let's see what else we got down here. What's that? Is that a Big Daddy? What is that thing? Wow, they were originally called protectors. Wow. Yeah, these are a little too underwatery, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know. The early versions of Splicer look more like an RE game. Yeah, no kidding. That's a great way to put it. Look at this thing. Grenadier Splicer. Like, they made the splicers into, like, more humanoid shaped. You know what I mean? Not like these bloated, kind of carcassy type characters. I like this style that they chose. Early environmental study. I think the water in this game was extremely well done. You definitely felt like you were underwater for sure. Hooker, created under the same time as Stitchy. Yeah, you see, there is a hooker in the game, but it looks not like this at all. I mean, I don't think they call it hooker. They're all basically splicers, right? What's this? Big Daddy? Big Daddy bursting through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man? The frickin' Kool-Aid Man. Let's go. I mean, this is not in the original game, obviously, because this is part of the remastered piece. First image that really captured all the visual elements that made BioShock. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a big world under the sea, but there's water everywhere. A hooker, yes, a hooker. Character derisively called the Yam Hand. Poster child for the concept phase that preceded decision to go with human enemies. Yeah, no, I think the human enemies play more into, oh my god, I've got to kill other humans, you know? Like the splicers are definitely more humanoid, which makes it even a little bit more distasteful, if you know what I mean. Same with the little sisters, right? If they were slugs, you wouldn't give a shit if you lost a slug or saved a slug. Save the slug, you know? No, no, no. It had to be more childlike. Cool. Who's this guy? Missing link model? Character is essentially the missing link between the grotesque early designs and the human splicers. This was the last bad model we did before moving on to what actually went into the shipping game. So this is the, like, this is, I guess, because look at the face. It doesn't... Pretty cool. Pretty cool. I don't know what that is. That's huge. Iconic Rapture concepts. This was the several paintings that try to portray the most important elements all at once. The Art Deco is definitely very, very cool in the BioShock world. Like that whole, like, what is that, Roaring 20s or whatever? Artemis, how you doing? Hello, hello. Welcome in. We're just checking out some of the extras here at the end of the game. Like, imagine running around saving these slugs versus saving little sisters. That just doesn't... No. Kind of interesting, like, the whole creative process, you know? Okay, how do I get out of here? Oh, quit domain? Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure if you want to go... Oh, I missed a few, too. So which one do we want to watch? Because I don't think I want to watch all of them. What's this one say? Reality check?
The moment you boot up BioShock, you can feel the story grab hold of you. A plane crashes at sea, a mysterious lighthouse, a sprawling city beneath the ocean. Hooking the player from the first touch without overwhelming him with convoluted RPG mechanics was key to the success of the game and the skillful ramping up of BioShock's legendary gameplay. BioShock has an amazing opening sequence that I can't imagine the game without it, with you know, plane and sort of the crash. But I understand that didn't come online until like the very end of development. Sean, is that true?
We had a couple of really depressing playtests. We had built all these systems. We thought we were doing a good job of like giving basically people a playground to play with and things to do. And when we had a playtest, we didn't realize how bad of a job we were doing in exposing those systems to the player, because we were so in these systems and in our own heads, we had no idea that we just weren't facing them towards the player at all. So after that playtest, we took a long, cold look at what we were doing and realized that we had to we were confident enough in the systems that they were going to be fun and meaningful to the player, but we really had to think about how we were going to introduce these systems to the player, and in such a way that they understand why the systems were there. Like, you can't ship a README file with the game and expect people to read it. Like, it has to be part of the experience. So the challenge is, how do you introduce people to these systems, but do it in such a way that it fits within the narrative? So we had to integrate all of these things into the story cleanly so that the player felt like it was one smooth experience. And I think the zap 'em and whack 'em thing was one of those.
And the 1-2 punch.
Yeah, the 1-2 punch that came out of that.
The plane sequence at the beginning, I heard a story that like a programmer put that together in like a day or two, and it was a very last minute thing, right?
It was. So we had done a focus test, and we had. It was one of the most depressing experiences of my life, because we were very close to being finished, and it was basically giving people what essentially became the demo, and people played it, and it was in Boston, and we were sort of behind these glass windows, all these sort of Boston guys are like, this is a wicked piece of shit. They hated it. They were making fun of it, and they were saying, it's like watching some guys and dolls beating each other up, and it's the stupidest thing they've ever seen. And we thought we were in pretty good shape at that point. And I remember the focus test guy was like sort of like a doctor giving me the bad news. Right. Sorry, Ken, you better get your affairs in order. Right. And we all came into work the next day, and we were like, what are we going to do? And we were all pretty depressed. But I think we started talking, and as we talked, we started thinking about what are they saying to us? What are these people saying to us? What we think there's something there. How are they missing it? And we decided that there was maybe they didn't understand who they were, who their role in the as a character, who their role in the world was, because the game at that point started with you in the ocean, floating in the ocean after the plane crash.
Wow.
The crash still was in the fiction. It just wouldn't show
You
it.
just didn't see it. So you
Wow.
had a voiceover saying, "My parents always said I was going to do great things," or whatever that. They didn't show the plane crash. We didn't establish a time period.
Yeah.
Because the plane is critical to establishing. You're smoking a cigarette. It's very 1960s looking. All that stuff was established. It wasn't established. So we decided we had no time and no money and no. So we sort of came up with a script. I wrote a line. I think Nate, one of our artists, recorded the line. Steven and Sean and those guys got to work on building this very simple sequence, which was simple. Relatively simple sequence, and then the plane crash actually happens over the BioShock logo we already had, but we wrote a radio play behind that with altitude, the crash, and that I think set the emotional and the people screaming in terror on the plane crash. That set the emotional tenor much better and explained who the player was, and all of a sudden we released. Then I think the next real encounter we had was people playing the demo, public encounter, and all of a sudden it was a very different experience.
No, I remember even back in the day, I think we did a thing on TV where we kind of talked about it. It was like that night, and I remember that night, like people on the forums were just like going nuts. And even though the game had a lot of press attention, when people finally got to play it and go through that sequence, I just remember there was this mass sort of excitement around it. And then the game shipped only a few weeks after that, right, or a month after that?
A week later, or a few days later.
It's amazing, like now to hear that, like literally like a month before the game came out, like the playing sequence came online or something. I mean, it was that late. Right?
Well, we still had to go through certification and all that.
So
it wasn't far. It wasn't far. It was really last minute, and it was one of those things where like you really shouldn't be putting in content that late. But we felt it. We were so close to having something good that we just
The plane scene makes the game.
We worked really hard. I remember how much time I spent on just that recorded of altitude. I can still hear the different version of that in my head. There's been so much time on that stuff, and these guys were working on getting the animations right and
the scene was shot in engine, but we decided to pre-render it so that we had to do less QA on it.
Right.
It wasn't going to be some like weird streaming error or crash error.
Wow.
It was just like we're just going to show the video. Yeah.
And it's interesting because once you start in the ocean, we had this experience of testing a lot with the water effects and how beautiful Steven's water effects were. People didn't realize they were out of a cutscene at that point. And so
Yeah. I can agree with that.
And they pick up the control, and all of a sudden they realize they were controlling things. But that, as Sean said, that
It was seamless.
actually interactive. It was done in the engine, but we just filmed it.
It was seamless.
As people were playing through the game and you were testing it, I'm sure there was debate about, when would you introduce these plasmids, what would the ramp be? Did that change at all, sort of as you got towards the end of development, about like, we're going to give people the gun at this point, or it's like we're going to trigger these plasmids at this point? Like, how did that work?
So like we moved guns around. Like for instance, there was a big debate about originally you found a gun in the lighthouse, a pistol in the lighthouse.
Oh,
at the very
right
beginning.
there, yeah.
And because it's a shooter, right? Like, what the hell? And we had a lot of debates about it, and I feel that it was important that we didn't do that because the fact that you sort of go through a lot of the experience without having the distraction of a gun is important to getting you immersed in the world. Because when you have all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But you don't have the hammer, so you just sort of had to take in the world and have that feeling of fear. And, like I know when you saw that splicer bounding around on the ceiling, that you couldn't do anything about it, and that had even though that's
those are those moments, right? Like I remember when I played Unreal for the first time, where it's like you're trapped and there's a monster and you can't do it, and the lights go out. It's like that's the moment with the splicer where you're like, I want to do something but I can't. And that evokes an emotion.
It was super creepy at the beginning, right? Yeah. I had chills too when I first played this. I fully agree with you.
I remember we kept, moving where the machine gun appeared around and where various plasmids appeared around. It was a real, it's a real fine-tuning process.
Yeah, and it gave us an opportunity, like especially with the shotgun, to really present the weapons, like put some space between them.
It's a moment when you finally.
Yeah, I think.
We get the shotgun Paul sequence.
Paul Hellquist was he put the sequence together for the when you see the shotgun laying in the pool of light. Like every game developer knows what that means, you know. You know
It's
that
a
you
trap.
something up, something's going to happen. But
Yep.
it was still a very effective way, as I'm remembering it, to, oh look, I've been waiting for this thing, I'm going to pick it up, and now you have an immediate opportunity to use it. But, you know, at the same time, we're trying to ramp up the tension level by having the splicers kind of on the outside of the light, so you can't really see them, and then coming in one at a time.
Wow.
And we had very little actually.
Even finding the gun in the
how they
pram
sliced it
is
back,
so
and
cool.
How they were set up and how the environment was lit was really important. You know, those
Well,
are,
there's even other things like when you get the TK plasmid, I don't think we had a lot of physical space and opportunity and time to really present that, so we came up with the narrative that, you know, it was the doctor's office and he used TK to practice tennis. And you tennis balls at you. So
That's
if you
right.
wanted to, you could catch the tennis balls and throw them, and you could knock things down. I think it revealed pickups that you could then
Wait, what?
hold it yourself with TK, but we're always trying to think of like little backstories that we could do. It doesn't have to be as involved as the shotgun ambush. Sometimes it's just, oh, let's take a grenade turret and turn it into a tennis ball turret.
because we wanted, yeah, like, and because I remember like the impulse was, you know, I've been to dentist office, and there's always some like weird aspect of the dentist personality they always want to get through their office. You know, they just have to have their hobby. In some way. And so we saw an opportunity there to both feature this. He's a tennis nut and teach TK at the same time.
Yeah, I remember that part. That was cool. There's a lot of these moments in the game when it's like, you know, you pause and you soak it all up. I don't know if there's another one that chat you wanted to watch. I'm not going to go through all of them, obviously. I don't know what Excelsior is. That's the only other one I had my eyes on. I haven't unlocked that yet. Let's just watch this one, and I think that'll do it.
The illusion of choice is a thinly veiled dynamic that drives many single-player gaming experiences. And while many developers spend a lot of time trying to convince players that choice is real and authentic in their games, the truth more often is that choice is a superficial concept in gaming narrative. BioShock confronted this idea head-on, searing into our minds a innocuous 3-word phrase with an unforgettable
Woo!
Would you kindly?
Would you kindly?
Of course, one of the most memorable moments in the game is the "Would you kindly" phrase and the reveal of you know, how that's been motivating the player throughout the entire game. It's still, to me, one of the, you know, most classic kind of narrative games in the past decade. What's interesting about that phrase is that it didn't always start like that. Can you tell us sort of about the evolution of sort of the, you know, the conditioning of the player? And there was once Excelsior was the phrase once.
Yeah, this is. I'm trying to recall.
Excelsior?
So we had the idea, like, because we had the Andrew Ryan scene very early. We knew sort of all the events that would happen. There were phrases before there was "Would you kindly." The notion existed and what it meant and what it was, but we didn't actually have the phrase "Would you kindly" until later. So we had a bunch of terms we threw in there. And like Excelsior was it for one point. That's probably comes from my Stan Lee fanboyism.
Was that like sort of throughout the game? It would have been like Excelsior.
Just randomly
There are some things when you're making games you just sort of throw in as like, we need
Sounds
something.
cool in
We
a
need
Why don't
something.
you head
here.
over there, Excelsior?
And then it sits there
Yeah.
for a year. And then all of a sudden you kind of forget it's not good, right? Until somebody comes along and says, "Dude,
Seriously?
Yeah.
what's
Or you meant it to
Excelsior?"
be like a stub-in. You never
Right.
meant it
Yeah.
to actually gain traction, and then you're like, oh crap.
But that sense of some phrase or word being repeated throughout the game that you wouldn't really realize its meaning
Yes.
Until later, that was there very early on.
Yes, yeah. And the fact that you would have something that seemed like a non-thing and then came back at you like a freight train later on.
Yeah.
It was there from
Yep.
very early.
Pretty sure.
Sit. Would you kindly?
Oh. That was so good.
Would you kindly? Run. Stop. Turn.
Remember this part? Oh.
A man chooses,
A slave.
slave obeys.
So that phrase.
Chills.
Talk about that. The sort of meta narrative of, you know, being in a game, thinking that you have a sense of choice, and making these decisions, but then obviously realizing that the player ultimately didn't have a choice or was conditioned in a way that they would react to that. That was sort of a new idea for a game. Where did that come from on your side, Ken? I mean, was there sort of a deeper sort of meaning behind it?
No, look, I think I was always interested in the concept. Whether it's Oedipus, not to get too pointy-headed here, but Oedipus sort of thinking he has, I'm going to leave, this city and go to another city because there's been this prophecy about me and I'm going to avoid my fate and I'm in complete control, and then finding out he's not in control at all. Manchurian Candidate, which is a story I love about, somebody who you find out is just a puppet, living a life of a man. And Fight Club, I always love those kind of stories about who am I and what is my agency in this world, because look, we struggle. I think everybody struggles that. How much we really have control over, and how much is our boss or parents or whatever telling us. So that's
Wow.
a natural thing for a story, and because it came from movies, that idea a lot, and plays. I don't think it was there was a lot of, it hadn't been explored in games really, and games are particularly interesting because games.
You feel like you are interacting with us, yeah.
And you're really being, most games, especially at the time, you're really just being railroaded down a corridor. It's very easy to underestimate gamers, and I think probably I did a little of my own underestimation there, that it would be a little too pointy-headed for people, but people seem to really engage, because it spoke to an experience they had, a struggle as a gamer they've always had, which is like, I want to control, but how much control do I really have?
True. And Sean, I mean, it was also something that was a great surprise when you played through the game. I'm sure even for people on the team, did everyone know that when Ken was sort of doing it, or it was revealed as people played through it?
I think, at some point the entire team knew. It wasn't. It was something that was talked about with a smaller group before it was brought to the entire team. Early on, when you heard the idea and you just kind of clicks, right? You're like, okay, I totally get this.
Did people get it? I seem to remember people looking at me like I was like a lunatic.
Not the specifics, and maybe it's the Excelsior. Or maybe you're talking about the Excelsior time, but the idea that you don't really have choice, and exactly like you said, you played through how many video games, and everybody's game is going to end the same way. You kill these people, you're going to pass through these checkpoints, and you think you have a choice, but ultimately the only real choice is to stop playing games. So
wow.
The idea that we're kind of like taking that on resonated. Now the actual, like, is it Excelsior or is it the Latin phrase I forgot, or if it's would you kindly?
See, here's how I remember it, and I could be, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I can remember being so surprised by the outside reaction, because I remember the internal reaction being completely nobody connected or engaged to it. I mean, we worked on it.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of surprised by the outside reaction, because I kind of thought it was like, as I said, it's a bit academic, right?
Yeah.
And it also could be a function of,
we're playing it close to the vest.
I could be misremembering it, or it could also just be a function of nobody making the game had the experience of playing it through and getting to that moment.
That's what I mean. Like, it was revealed to them in advance of really playing it, so it wasn't a surprise.
Yeah, they had seen it in all its really half-assed, development stages
and
along the way.
out of order.
Yeah, out of order.
And it's not really something you can play test over an afternoon, because it takes a little while to get to that point.
You need to lack the knowledge about what the game is to be able to sort of have that all the way through. I know you guys have talked about the idea of Atlas, the voice actor changing, and it was, I guess, very important that you nailed that actor, right? And you trusted that actor until there was sort of the Fontaine reveal and sort of understanding that.
Yes, trust was everything there, right? And so there was something about either the actor or the writing or the accent that just people immediately said, this guy's no good, right? First Atlas we had, because you have to trust this guy, and unless you don't, there's no trust, there's no punch in the gut. I think we've really focused on making him have personal stakes in the story as well, that he had his family trapped. Of course, it was all fiction, right? But he had skin in the game.
That's who we met first, is Atlas.
Especially because the whole world was so hostile to you. I think it took a while to get that exactly right.
Listen, I've got a family. I need to get them out of here. But the splicers have cut me off from them. If you can reach them in Neptune's bounty, then maybe, just maybe. I know you must feel like the unlucky.
Wow.
But you're the only hope I'll ever see my wife and child again.
Sean, what do you hope is the kind of lasting legacy of BioShock? 10 years hence, a lot of things you guys were doing, have sort of become common now, right? With
upgrades and moral choices in games and whatnot, but it was really pioneering work a decade ago. When you reflect on it, what do you hope people remember the game for sort of pushing forward?
For me, it's telling a story with the medium and how we used everything available to us to tell that story. We used the environment to set up the backstory of Rapture and really create a sense of space, which I think is vitally important to getting the players to trust that, to sit down and kind of like just be in the space and let these things happen. Even the radio logs, the rudimentary animation that we had at the time. I mean, we really sat down with the tools that we had and at our disposal and tried to tell a meaningful story. Maybe not meaningful, but something that would be memorable to people that they could take away and, like you said earlier, have that water cooler moment where they're excited enough to talk about it after they put the controller down. So for me, I think the legacy is that it was a story well told.
For me, it was a sense of place, being like the Rapture is a real thing, even though it's not. It's actually a very crude, from the time, we're always a big crude bunch of polygons and texture maps. It's only, the original game was only 720, I think, and I played a lot of it when we were testing it on a 14-inch, television, that it still felt like a sense of place in the music and the characters, that it's a real place. And I think that my memories of the BioShock games was that I take away that Rapture's a real place and Elizabeth's a real person. Those are the two sort of big things that stick with me with those two games, and that's sort of what I'll always, carry forward with me in my life.
BioShock is, it's a place, but as we saw with Infinite, I mean, it's an idea and it's a sort of a type of game. I think a lot of people say like, oh, this is a type of experience. When you think about, your career, where you guys want to go, I mean, that idea of those types of games, do you miss it now that you sort of moved on to other things now, or do you feel like it's sort of, you closed that chapter?
I mean, it's always a part of what you do. Like, System Shock 2 was a part of BioShock, but it wasn't System Shock 2. It was you're growing past that and trying out new things. I think BioShock and BioShock Infinite, and even going back to SWAT 4, those will always be a part of my experience as a game developer and what we're trying to do with the medium. So I don't think it's something that you just draw a line and say, we'll never return, because there's always lessons that you can learn and things that you bring with you to the next project that you're working on.
I don't think the new game is going to, they're not going to be surprised that this game is their new games from us. They're going to see a lot of what we had done before in terms of world building and aspects of storytelling. The goal is to sort of, move away from the you really have no choice kind of thing, and that's a very, 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 very hard problem because we spent years working on it. But we're building upon a foundation of stuff we've done before, just trying to go in a different direction with it. But it's always going to be part of our DNA.
Wow.
City where the artist would not fear censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.
Yes, BioShock is definitely that game that emotionally resonated the first time I played it, and Lizard, as you mentioned, the second time I played it, I was like, oh wait, now I think I see what's going on. And the hints that were there that you didn't see it the first time became a little more obvious the second or third time. But the story is rich, and the environment just is part of it. The combat at the time, this was a game that was made with the different weapons and upgrading the weapons and upgrading, your powers. It wasn't common, and it definitely was something that stood out amongst all the games of its day. But, they went on to make BioShock Infinite, which, is a progression. And I think they're making something now. Ken Levine, in particular, is making something new, I think. But I'm not going to go through all the videos, but I think that in my heart as well, BioShock is one of my all-time favorite games. And I'm very happy that I got to spend some time with you folks and share it together. So we got to move on to the next thing. Bye, BioShock. It was fun to revisit you. And we'll see you soon.